The old alien walked slowly toward the center of the great hall. His name was Torvan, and he was the last of his kind. His skin, which had once glowed with a soft blue light, was now dull and cracked like old stone. His legs shook with every step, and his breathing was heavy and rough, but his eyes were still sharp. His eyes still held the memory of everything he had lost. They had all come here to argue about borders and trade and power. The same things they always argued about. None of them had come to listen to an old man tell a story. Torvan reached the speaker's platform and stood there for a moment, catching his breath. The hall buzzed with conversation. No one was paying attention to him. He was nobody. His species, the Kethri, had been erased from the galactic records long ago. Most of the delegates did not even know the Kethri had ever existed. He pressed the button that turned on his microphone, and the sound of his breathing echoed through the chamber. A few heads turned, not many. "I have come to warn you," he said. His voice was thin and tired, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the hall. "I have traveled for 30 years to stand in this place and say these words. I ask only that you listen." Someone in the upper rows laughed quietly. "I am here to talk about the humans," Torvan said. The laughter spread. It was not loud or cruel. It was the kind of laughter people make when someone says something silly. Humans were a small species. They lived on a handful of worlds in a quiet corner of the galaxy. They were soft and short-lived. They had no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no armor. They bled easily and died easily. The galaxy had thousands of species far more powerful, far more advanced, and far more interesting than humanity. "I know what you think of them," Torvan continued. "I know you see them as children, weak, unimportant. I thought the same thing once. My people thought the same thing." He paused and let the silence sit for a moment. "My people are gone now." The laughter faded, but only a little. A delegate from one of the insect worlds clicked its jaws in amusement. A tall, gray-skinned creature from the Merchant Coalition leaned over and whispered something to its neighbor. Torvan told his story. He told them about New Thessaly, a small human colony on a green world near the border of Kethri space. It had been a farming colony. 12,000 people lived there. They grew food and raised children and built small houses with gardens. The Kethri had wanted the minerals beneath the surface of their world. So the Kethri had sent a raiding fleet. They had burned the colony from orbit. They had killed every man, woman, and child on the surface. 12,000 lives, gone in a single afternoon. "We thought nothing of it," Torvan said. "It was a small colony on a small world. The humans were a small species. We expected them to complain, perhaps to send a message of protest, perhaps to ask for payment. That is what small species do." He shook his head slowly. They did not complain. They did not protest. They said nothing. For 3 years, they said nothing at all. He told them how the Kethri had laughed during those 3 years, how they had joked about the silent humans, how they had made fun of a species too weak to even respond to an attack. Some Kethri leaders had talked about raiding more human worlds, since the humans clearly could not fight back. And then, Torvan said, his voice dropping low, the humans came. He described what happened next in simple, quiet words. The humans did not send a war fleet. They sent everything. Every ship they had, every soldier, every weapon, every piece of technology they could carry. They did not come to fight a war. They came to end a species. The Kethri had a powerful military. They had defended their territory for thousands of years. They had fought dozens of wars against dozens of enemies. None of that mattered. The humans cut through their defenses like fire through dry grass. They did not slow down. They did not negotiate or accept surrender. They burned every Kethri world. They destroyed every Kethri ship. They tore apart every station, every outpost, every colony. In 4 months, the Kethri were gone. "I survived because I was on a trading mission far from home," Torvan said. "When I returned, there was nothing left. Not a building, not a body, not a single stone standing on top of another stone. The humans had erased us from the universe, as if we had never existed. The hall was quieter now, but not silent. Many delegates still wore expressions of doubt and amusement. One of them, a tall and powerful figure sitting in the front row, leaned forward with a thin smile on his face. This was Archon Velith, the supreme ambassador of the Dravosi hegemony. The Dravosi were the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. They controlled thousands of worlds, commanded millions of warships, and had crushed every species that had ever challenged them. Velith was tall and sharp-featured, with deep red skin and golden eyes that never blinked. "A touching story," Velith said, his voice smooth and cold. "But the Kethri were a minor species with outdated weapons. The humans beat you because you were already weak. This has nothing to do with us." Torvan looked at him. For a long moment, the old alien said nothing. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady and clear. "I came here to deliver a warning. Do not harm the humans. Do not touch their worlds. Do not kill their people. Because you do not understand what they become when they have something to grieve." Velith laughed. It was a big, open laugh, and dozens of other delegates joined him. The sound filled the great hall and bounced off the walls. "I appreciate the theater, but the hegemony does not take advice from dead species." He stood and addressed the full conclave. "I am pleased to announce that the hegemony will be annexing 3 human border colonies to secure valuable mineral resources. The operation will begin within the month." The hall erupted in chatter and noise. Delegates argued and discussed, and placed bets on how quickly the humans would surrender. No one looked at Torvan anymore. The old alien stood alone on the platform. He closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. His hands trembled at his sides. He had spent 30 years traveling across the galaxy to deliver this warning, and it had meant nothing. He turned and began the long, slow walk out of the hall. As he passed through the door, he whispered to himself in a language that no one else in the universe could speak. "Then you have chosen extinction." The door closed behind him, and the galaxy continued to laugh. The Dravosi did not waste time. Archon Velith had made his announcement, and within 3 weeks, a massive war fleet crossed the border into human space. 400 warships, each one the size of a small city, moved in perfect formation through the dark between stars. Their hulls were painted the deep red of the hegemony, and their weapons glowed with the cold light of plasma cannons that could melt rock from orbit. The 3 human colonies they were heading for were called Elysium 4, Port Kalen, and Ashenmore. They were small worlds, farming worlds, the kind of places where people move to raise families and grow old in peace. Elysium 4 had green hills and wide rivers. Port Kalen had fishing towns along a silver coast. Ashenmore was a dry world, but its people had learned to grow crops in the red soil and had built a life there with their bare hands. None of them had armies. They had small defense stations and a handful of patrol ships, the kind of protection you keep to chase away pirates, not to fight an empire. The Dravosi hit Elysium 4 first. The bombardment started without warning. Plasma fire rained down from the sky like burning rain, and the green hills turned black in minutes. The rivers boiled. The cities crumbled. The people had no time to run and nowhere to run to. The defense stations fired back, but their weapons bounced off the thick armor of the Dravosi ships like stones thrown at a mountain. Elysium 4 fell in less than 6 hours. Port Kalen was next. The fishing towns along the coast were turned to ash. The silver water turned gray with smoke and dust. The people there fought harder than the Dravosi expected. Fishermen and farmers picked up whatever weapons they could find and fired at landing parties from behind walls of rubble. It did not matter. The Dravosi had thousands of trained soldiers in heavy armor. Port Kalen fell in a single day. Then came Ashenmore. Ashenmore was different because of what happened to the evacuation ships. When the attack began, the colony's governor ordered a full evacuation. Every civilian transport, every cargo ship, Every shuttle that could fly was loaded with families and launched toward open space. 200,000 people, most of them women and children, packed into ships that were never designed for war. The Dravasi fleet commander saw the ships leaving. He had a choice. He could let them go. They were unarmed civilians running away. Every law of galactic warfare said you let them go. He destroyed them anyway. Every single ship. 200,000 people burned in the cold dark of space, while the Dravasi recorded it from their bridge cameras. The fleet commander sent the footage to the Galactic Communication Network. He wanted everyone to see. He wanted everyone to know what happened when a species stood in the way of the hegemony. The galaxy watched. Some species were horrified. Many were not. The strong had always crushed the weak. That was how the galaxy worked. Several delegates at the conclave sent congratulations to Archon Velith. Trade negotiations continued. Life went on. Everyone waited for the humans to respond. A day passed, then 2, then a week. The galactic communication channels that connected to human space stayed silent. No angry messages, no declarations of war, no calls for help, no pleas for mercy, nothing. At first, the Dravosi thought the humans were in shock. That was understandable. They had just lost 3 worlds and hundreds of thousands of people. Perhaps they needed time to process the loss. Perhaps they were gathering their leaders to discuss surrender terms. Velith told his advisors to prepare a list of demands for when the humans finally came to beg. But the silence continued. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. Every communication relay connecting to human space went dark. Trade ships that tried to enter human territory found the border closed. Not just closed, but sealed. Defense platforms that had never been there before now sat at every jump point, armed and active, turning away every ship that approached. Scouts sent by other species were warned once to leave. If they did not leave, they were destroyed without a second warning. Human space became a black wall. No light came out, no sound came out. Nothing came out at all. The Dravosi began to feel the first small touch of something they had not felt in centuries. It was not fear, not yet. It was confusion. They did not understand what was happening. Every species they had ever conquered had reacted the same way. First anger, then despair, then surrender. The pattern never changed. But the humans were not following the pattern. The humans were doing something the Dravasi had never seen before. They were doing nothing. Or so it seemed. Intelligence agents were sent into human space through secret routes and back channels. None of them came back. Spy drones were launched across the border. None of them sent back data. Long-range sensors were pointed at human worlds and shipyards. The readings were strange. Energy signatures were off the charts. Heat output from human industrial centers had increased by a factor of 1,000. Something enormous was happening inside that wall of silence, but no one could see what it was. The conclave held an emergency session. For the first time, there was real worry in the voices of the delegates. Not worry for the humans, but worry about what the silence meant. The insect delegates clicked nervously. The merchant coalition demanded answers. Even species that had no connection to the conflict shifted in their seats and looked at each other with uncertain eyes. Archon Velith stood before the conclave and smiled his thin golden smile. "They are afraid," he said. "They have locked themselves in their little corner of space because they know that if they come out, we will destroy them." The silence is the sound of a species that knows its place. Most of the delegates believed him. They wanted to believe him. It was a comfortable explanation. It made sense. The strong won and the weak hid, that was the natural order of things. But not everyone was convinced. In a small room on a quiet station far from the conclave, Elder Torvon sat alone in the dim light. He had watched the footage from Ashenmoor. He had watched the evacuation ships burn. He had watched the galaxy shrug and move on. And now he felt the silence, and it made his old bones cold. He had heard it before. A lifetime ago, when the Kethri had destroyed New Thessaly and waited for the humans to respond. The same silence, the same darkness, the same wall of nothing. The Kethri had also called it fear. The Kethri had also laughed. Torvon was sitting in the dark, staring at the wall, when his communication device made a small sound. A message had arrived. It was encoded in a way he had not seen in decades, using a method that only the Kethri had used. Someone had found an old Kethri code and used it to send him a private message. He opened it with shaking hands. The message was short. 2 words in the old Kethri language. A language that no living being should know. But someone knew it. Someone had taken the time to learn the language of a dead species, just to send these 2 words to the last survivor. The words said, "Remember us." Torvon stared at the message for a long time. They rolled down his cracked and faded scales, and fell onto his hands, and he did not wipe them away. He was not crying for himself. He was not crying for the Kethri, who had earned their destruction. He was crying for the Dravozi. Because the silence did not mean the humans were afraid. The silence did not mean they were hiding. The silence meant they had stopped talking and started working. It meant that every factory, every shipyard, every laboratory, and every forge in human space was running at full power, day and night, without rest, without pause, without mercy. The humans were not mourning their dead. They were building something for them. And when it was finished, the galaxy would learn the lesson that the Kethri had learned too late. The lesson that Torvon had traveled 30 years to teach. The lesson that nobody wanted to hear. That humanity did not grieve the way other species grieved. Humanity grieved with fire. Behind the wall of silence, humanity was not sleeping. It was not hiding. It was not afraid. It was transforming itself into something the galaxy had never seen before. And it was doing it with a focus and a fury that would have terrified any species watching, if any species had been able to see. Admiral Kira Solyev stood at the window of the command station orbiting Earth and looked down at the planet below. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and dark eyes that gave away nothing. She had been a career officer for 30 years. The kind of soldier who was calm and quiet and never raised her voice. She had never wanted a war. She had spent most of her career keeping peace along the border, resolving small disputes with patience and careful words. That woman was gone now. The woman standing at the window had watched the footage from Ashenmoor 47 times. She had memorized the names of every person who died on those evacuation ships. All 200,000 of them. She kept the list on a datapad that she carried in her coat pocket at all times. And she read it every night before she slept and every morning when she woke up. She had not been chosen to lead the response. She had volunteered. Every admiral in the United Terran Command had volunteered. Every captain, every lieutenant, every enlisted soldier. The military had not needed to issue a draft. There were more volunteers than there were positions to fill. Civilians lined up at recruitment centers. Factory workers refused to go home. Scientists canceled their research and offered their skills. Teachers, doctors, engineers, farmers, artists, all of them came forward and asked the same question. What do you need me to do? That was the thing about humans that the galaxy never understood. Individually, they were fragile. A single human could be killed by a fall, a disease, a sharp piece of metal. They lived short lives. They broke easily. But when something hurt them, when something killed their families and burned their homes, they did not scatter. They came together. They stopped being individuals and became something else, something larger and harder and more dangerous than any single person could ever be. They became a species with a single purpose. Solyev turned from the window and walked through the command station. Every corridor was alive with movement. Officers ran between departments with datapads and reports. Communication screens flickered with updates from every corner of human space. The noise was constant, a low hum of organized activity that never stopped, day or night. She took a transport down to the orbital shipyards above Mars. What she saw there would have made the Dravosi lose their appetite for war, if they could have seen it. The shipyards stretched across the sky like a metal forest. Thousands of construction platforms hung in the void, and on each one, a warship was being built. Not slowly, not carefully, not with the elegant craftsmanship that older species used. These ships were being assembled with raw speed and brute force. Teams of workers and construction robots worked in shifts that never ended. Welding torches burned like tiny stars against the dark. Metal plates the size of city blocks were lifted into place by gravity cranes and locked together with bolts as thick as trees. The ships themselves were ugly. There was no other word for it. The Dravosi built warships that were sleek and beautiful, with smooth red hulls and graceful curves. The ships being built in the human yards were square, heavy, and covered in thick armor plating. They looked like fists made of steel. They had no beauty and no elegance. They had been designed to do one thing, and one thing only: survive long enough to kill what they were pointed at. Solyev walked through the yards and inspected the progress. A young engineer named Reese fell into step beside her, talking fast and pointing at screens. "We cracked the Dravosi shield technology," Reese said. "Took apart the wreckage from their attack ships and figured out how it worked. Our new torpedoes can pass right through their shields. They won't even see them coming." Solyev nodded. "How many ships?" 8,000 combat ready within the month. Another 4,000 in the second wave. 12,000 warships. The entire Dravosi intelligence network had estimated that humanity could build at most 500 ships in a year. They were wrong by a factor of 20. But the ships were not the most dangerous thing the humans had built. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in a laboratory that did not officially exist, a team of 60 scientists had been working without sleep for 5 months. They had built a device called the Requiem Array. It was based on gravity manipulation technology, something humanity had been experimenting with for decades, but had never turned into a weapon. A Requiem Array could reach across space and grab hold of a star's outer layer, its corona, and crush it inward. It would not destroy the star. It would dim it. It would reduce its light and heat to a fraction of what it had been, turning every world in that solar system into a frozen wasteland. It was not a weapon of war. It was a weapon of endings. It existed for one purpose: to take everything away from an enemy, the way everything had been taken from the people of Ashenmore. Solyev visited the laboratory and stood before the array. It was smaller than she expected. A dark metal frame, no larger than a room, filled with cables and crystal lenses that hummed with a low, deep vibration she could feel in her chest. She stared at it for a long time. "Does it work?" she asked. The lead scientist, a woman named Okafor with tired eyes and oil-stained hands, nodded. "We tested it on a dead star in the outer rim. It works." Solyev placed her hand on the frame. The metal was warm. She thought about the names on her list. 200,000 names. 200,000 people who had tried to run and had been burned alive in the dark. "Load it onto the flagship," she said. The fleet was assembled in the shadow of Jupiter, hidden from any long-range sensors that might be watching. 12,000 warships, arranged in formations that filled the space between Jupiter's moons like a wall of metal. At the center was the flagship, a massive vessel called the Ashenmore Remembrance. It was the largest ship humanity had ever built, and it carried the Requiem Array in its belly, like a heart made of cold fire. Solyev stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and looked out at her fleet. Every screen on every ship in the formation displayed the same thing: the names of the dead. They scrolled slowly, one after another, white text on a black background. 200,000 names. It took hours for the full list to cycle through. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. Every ship, every soldier, every pilot and gunner and engineer heard her voice at the same time. "I am not going to give you a speech about glory," she said. "There is no glory in what we are about to do. I am not going to tell you that we are fighting for freedom or for honor. or for the future of our species. We are not. She paused. The fleet was silent. We are fighting for them. She pointed at the scrolling names. Every name on that list was a person. They had families. They had plans. They had lives they were supposed to live, and those lives were taken from them by people who thought we were too small and too weak to matter. Her voice was steady and calm, the way it always was. But there was something underneath it now, something hard and sharp and unbreakable. We are not going to win a war. We are going to make sure that no one in this galaxy ever does this to us again. We are going to teach them a lesson they will remember for 10,000 years, and the lesson is simple. She looked directly into the camera, so that every person in the fleet could see her eyes. You do not touch our people. 12,000 ships, carrying 2 million soldiers and sailors and pilots, slid forward through the dark in perfect silence. They crossed the border of human space and entered the void between empires. Behind them, the names of the dead continued to scroll. Ahead of them, the Dravasi hegemony waited, still laughing, still confident, still blind to what was coming. They would not be laughing for long. The first sign that something was wrong came from a Dravosi border station called Outpost Karath. It was a small military base at the edge of hegemony space, staffed by 300 soldiers and a handful of sensor technicians whose job was to watch the empty space between the stars and report anything unusual. The senior technician on duty that night was a young Dravosi named Ilan. He was bored. He had been staring at sensor screens for 6 hours, and nothing had happened. Nothing ever happened at Outpost Karath. It was the quietest post in the hegemony. Then every alarm on his console went off at the same time. Ilan jumped out of his chair and stared at the screen. The sensor data made no sense. It showed a wall of contacts moving toward the outpost from the direction of human space. Not dozens of contacts, not hundreds, thousands. The screen was so full of signals that they blurred together into a solid mass of light. He opened a communication channel to Hegemony Command. This is Outpost Karath. We are detecting a massive fleet approaching from Sector 7, requesting identification and orders. The response came back in seconds. Karath, confirm your readings. Our intelligence says the humans have no more than 500 combat ships. Ilan looked at the screen again. His hands were shaking. Command, I am confirming my readings. Contact count is approximately 12,000 warships. Repeat, 12,000. They will reach our position in 4 minutes. There was a long silence on the other end of the channel. Command, Ilan said. He never heard the response. The first wave of human torpedoes hit Outpost Karath 11 seconds later, and the station became a cloud of burning metal and gas that drifted slowly into the dark. The human fleet did not stop. It did not slow down. It passed through the wreckage of the outpost without pausing, and continued deeper into Dravosi space. The first real battle happened at the fortress world of Dren Vashal, a heavily defended planet that served as the hegemony's forward military base. 1,200 Dravosi warships were stationed there, along with orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapon systems that could shoot down approaching ships from the surface. The human fleet arrived and attacked without warning, without communication, and without mercy. Admiral Soliev had given simple orders. No negotiations, no demands for surrender, no pauses. Hit them and keep moving. The Battle of Dren Vashal lasted 11 minutes. The Dravosi ships fired their weapons and watched in horror as the human ships absorbed the damage and kept coming. The thick, ugly armor plating that covered every human vessel did exactly what it had been designed to do. Plasma bolts that would have torn apart any other ship in the galaxy splashed against the human hulls and left nothing but black scorch marks. Then, the human weapons fired back, and the Dravosi learned what it felt like to have their shields mean nothing. The new human torpedoes passed through Dravosi shields, as if the shields were not there. Ships that had been considered unbreakable exploded from the inside out. defense platforms were cut apart by focused energy beams. The orbital ring around Drenvashal, which had taken 200 years to build, was reduced to scrap metal in less than 5 minutes. The surviving Dravosi ships tried to retreat. Some of them managed to send distress signals before they were destroyed. The messages they sent were panicked and confused. The words came through in broken fragments. Too many. Shields useless. They don't stop. They don't stop. One damaged Dravosi cruiser, its engines failing and its crew dying, turned its nose toward the nearest human ship and tried to ram it in a final act of defiance. The human ship sidestepped it without slowing down and destroyed it with a single shot. There was no emotion in the action, no anger, and no satisfaction, just efficiency. The human fleet moved on. News of the defeat at Drenvashal spread across the hegemony like a disease. For the first time in living memory, the Dravosi felt fear, not the small, manageable fear of a difficult battle, but the deep, cold fear of something they could not stop and could not understand. Fortress worlds fell, one after another. The humans did not occupy them. They did not plant flags or claim territory. They destroyed every military target on the surface and in orbit, and then they moved on. They left the civilian populations alive, but defenseless. They were not interested in land. They were not interested in power. They were interested in only one thing, and that thing was the complete and total destruction of the Dravosi military. The galactic conclave erupted in panic. Species that had laughed at Elder Torvan's warning now scrambled to send diplomatic ships to the advancing human fleet. Messages were sent in every language, on every frequency, pleas for negotiation, offers to mediate, demands to stop, threats from species that were afraid the humans would not stop with the Dravosi. The humans did not respond to any of them. Their communication channels remained closed. The wall of silence that had surrounded human space now moved with the fleet, a bubble of quiet that swallowed every message sent to it and gave nothing back. Archon Velith watched the reports come in from his command center on the hegemony throne world of Cas Valor. For the first time in his long life, the thin smile was gone from his face. His golden eyes were wide and dark. He had never imagined this was possible. No species in galactic history had ever built a military force this large, this quickly. No species had ever fought with this kind of cold, relentless focus. He ordered every remaining ship in the hegemony to converge on Cas Valor. Every warship, every patrol vessel, every armed transport. He called in favors from allied species. He hired mercenary fleets. He emptied every shipyard and every reserve base. When the fleet was assembled in orbit above his throne world, it numbered 40,000 warships. It was the largest defensive fleet ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. Velith stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked at the vast armada surrounding his world. 40,000 ships, their hulls catching the red light of the Cas Valor star. He told himself that no force in the universe could break through this wall. The human fleet arrived 2 days later. Admiral Solyev looked at the sensor readings and saw the massive Dravosi fleet waiting for her. 40,000 ships. Her fleet had 12,000. The numbers were not in her favor. She did not care. She opened a single communication channel, the first transmission from human space in 6 months. But it was not a message for the Dravosi. It was a broadcast, a list, names, read aloud by a computer-generated voice, one after another, in a steady, calm tone. The names of the dead, all 200,000 of them. The broadcast played on every Dravosi frequency, on every screen, in every ship. There was nothing else. No demands, no ultimatums, just names. Then the human fleet attacked. The Battle of Cas Valor lasted 3 days. It was the bloodiest battle the galaxy had ever seen. The Dravosi fought with everything they had. They fought with desperation and fury, and the kind of courage that comes from knowing you have no other choice. But it was not enough. The human ships were relentless. When a ship was damaged beyond repair, its crew aimed it at the nearest enemy vessel and fired the engines to full. They did not eject. They did not surrender. They used their dying ships as weapons. The Dravosi had never seen anything like it. They had conquered species that begged for mercy and species that fought bravely. They had never fought a species that treated its own death as just another tool. On the third day, the last Dravosi warship was destroyed. The space above Cas Valor was filled with wreckage, a graveyard of metal and fire that stretched from horizon to horizon. 40,000 ships, reduced to dust. Soliev gave the order. The Requiem array powered up. A deep hum filled the remembrance, and a beam of twisted gravity reached out across the void and touched the Cas Valor star. The star shuddered. Its light flickered, and then slowly it began to dim. It did not explode. It did not die. It simply grew weaker, colder, smaller. The warm red light that had sustained the Dravosi homeworld for millions of years faded to a dull, cold orange. On the surface below, temperatures began to drop. Within days, they would drop below freezing. Within weeks, the oceans would begin to ice over. Soliev did not destroy Cas Valor. She left the people alive. She left them with their cities and their homes and their history. But she took away their sun. She left them to survive in the cold and the dark, the same cold and dark that the people of Ashenmore had felt in the last seconds of their lives. An officer on the bridge spoke quietly. "Admiral, the Dravosi are transmitting a surrender." "There is no surrender to accept," she said. "There is no hegemony anymore." The names of the dead continue to play on every screen, in every ship, scrolling in silence through the dark. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Cas Valor, and the galaxy was a different place. The Dravosi hegemony, which had ruled over thousands of worlds and commanded the fear and respect of every living species, was gone. Not conquered, not occupied, simply gone. The species that had once served under the hegemony's boot were free now, blinking in the sudden light of independence like prisoners walking out of a dark cell. Some of them were building new governments. Some were fighting among themselves. Some were simply trying to figure out what it meant to make their own decisions for the first time in centuries. On Cas Valor itself, the Dravosi survived. That was the worst part, at least for them. They survived. Billions of them lived in underground shelters and heated caverns beneath the surface of their frozen world. The star above them still burned, but it burned cold now. A dim orange eye in a gray sky that gave barely enough light to see by, and nowhere near enough heat to sustain life on the surface. The oceans had frozen solid. The cities stood empty, coated in thick layers of ice that crept up the walls and covered the windows like white curtains. The Dravosi were not dead. They were simply reduced. A proud civilization that had once controlled a quarter of the galaxy now spent its days digging for warmth and rationing food. They would survive. Humans had made sure of that. They had left the Dravosi with enough technology and supplies to keep their people alive, underground. It was not a kindness. It was a choice. The humans wanted the Dravosi to live. They wanted them to remember. And the galaxy remembered too. The Grand Conclave reconvened for the first time since the war. The massive hall was full again. Thousands of delegates from thousands of species. But the atmosphere was nothing like it had been a year ago. There was no laughter. There were no side conversations. There were no casual jokes or bored expressions. The delegates sat in their seats and looked at each other with careful eyes. And the silence in the hall was heavy with something that had not been there before. Respect. Or perhaps it was fear. It was hard to tell the difference. The first order of business was the passage of new laws, a set of agreements that the delegates had been drafting for months. They were called the Terran Accords, and they established protections for human colonies throughout the galaxy. But they went further than that. The Accords also created protections for all minor species. for every small civilization that had ever been pushed around, or ignored, or trampled by a larger power. The laws passed without opposition. Not a single delegate voted against them. Not because they all agreed with the principles behind them, but because they had all watched what happened to the Dravosi, and they understood the message. The universe had rules now, and the rules were simple. You did not attack the defenseless. You did not burn civilian ships. You did not kill people who could not fight back, and if you did, there was a species out there that would make you pay for it in ways you could not imagine. The irony was not lost on anyone. Humanity had not asked for these laws. Humanity had not demanded them. Humanity had simply gone home after the war and reopened its borders and resumed trading as if nothing had happened. They did not claim Dravosi territory. They did not demand payment. They did not install governors or puppet governments on the worlds they had liberated. They took nothing that was not already theirs. That was what made them so terrifying. An empire could be understood. An empire wanted land and resources and power. And once you gave it those things, it was satisfied. But the humans did not want any of those things. They wanted only one thing, and that was to be left alone. And they were willing to destroy the most powerful civilization in the galaxy to get it. After the accords were signed, the speaker of the conclave made an announcement that surprised everyone. Elder Torvan had been invited to address the chamber once more. The old alien walked to the speaker's platform the same way he had walked a year ago, slowly and painfully, his legs shaking and his breath coming in short, rough gasps. He was older now, much older. His scales had lost almost all of their color, and his eyes were clouded at the edges. But he was still alive, and he was still standing, and that was more than most people had expected. The hall was completely silent as he reached the platform. Every eye was on him. Every ear was listening. There were no whispers, no jokes, no laughter. The delegates who had mocked him the last time he stood here now looked at him with expressions that ranged from guilt to awe. Torvan looked out across the chamber. He took his time. He let the silence build until it filled the room like water filling a bowl. "I told you," he said. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the hall. No one moved. "I stood in this place, and I told you what would happen, and you laughed at me. I told you about my people, the Ketheri, and how we were erased from the universe because we killed 12,000 humans on a small colony world. I told you that the humans do not forgive and do not forget. I told you that their grief is not like our grief, and you laughed." He paused and looked down at his hands. They were trembling. "I do not blame you for laughing. I would have laughed too, once, before I saw what I saw. It is hard to believe that a species so small and so fragile could be so dangerous. They do not look dangerous. They look soft. They sing songs to their children at night. They cry when their loved ones die. They build gardens and paint pictures and write poems about sunsets. They are gentle creatures, and it is easy to look at them and see weakness." He raised his head and looked directly at the delegates. "But it is precisely because they love so deeply that they destroy so completely. Their kindness is not a weakness. It is the source of their power. Every bond they form, every friendship, every family, every community, it is another thread in a rope that cannot be broken. And when you cut those threads, when you kill the people they love, you do not weaken them. You set them on fire, and they will burn everything you have built, until there is nothing left but ashes and silence." The hall was so quiet that the hum of the station's engines could be heard through the walls. "The Dravosi are alive," Torvan continued. "The humans left them alive. Think about what that means. The humans had the power to destroy them completely, the way they destroyed my people. But they chose not to. They chose to let the Dravosi live in the cold and the dark and remember what they did. That is not cruelty. That is something worse. That is patience. That is a species that thinks in generations, not in moments. The Dravosi will spend the next 1,000 years remembering, and so will every other species that watched." He straightened his back, and for a moment, just a moment, his scales flickered with the faintest trace of blue light, a ghost of the glow they had once carried. So let me give you my warning one last time, and this time I believe you will listen. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Do not mistake their patience for fear. Do not touch their worlds. Do not harm their people. Let them live in peace, and they will be the best neighbors you have ever had. They will trade with you and help you and share their knowledge and their music and their strange, beautiful art. His voice dropped low. But if you hurt them, if you take from them the people they love, then there is no force in this galaxy that will protect you from what comes next. Not your fleets, not your alliances, not your fortress worlds. Nothing. Because they will not stop until the lesson is learned, and the lesson is always the same. He looked out at the thousands of silent faces one final time. You do not touch their people. He turned and walked off the platform, and no one said a word. The silence lasted for a very long time. Months later, on the rebuilt colony of Ashenmore, a woman stood alone in a valley at sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, and the air smelled like fresh grass and new soil. Behind her, in the distance, she could hear the sound of children playing. Their laughter carried across the fields like music. Admiral Kira Soliev, retired, stood before a wall of glass that stretched across the valley from one hill to the other. The wall was clear, and the evening light passed through it and cast long shadows on the ground. Etched into the glass, in letters so small you had to stand close to read them, were names. 200,000 names. Every person who had died on the evacuation ships above this world. Soliev reached out and placed her hand flat against the glass. She closed her eyes and stood there, feeling the warmth on her palm and listening to the children laugh behind her. It's done, she whispered. The wind moved through the valley and rustled the grass, and the last light of the day shone through 200,000 names and scattered across the ground like tiny stars. Behind her, the children kept playing. Ashenmore was alive again. Humanity was at peace, and across the galaxy, in 1,000 languages and on 1,000 worlds, a new proverb had taken root. It was spoken softly, always with respect, and always with a careful glance over the shoulder, as if the humans might somehow hear. Let them grieve in peace, for if they must grieve because of you, you will not live to see them stop. The sun set over Ashenmore, and the stars came out, and the galaxy was quiet.